the idea that industrial wind turbines into the Great Lakes, into Lake Erie specifically, it is a threat to our fresh water. And that's what we must really be cognizant of, really be aware that, you know, fresh water is the greatest resource that we have on the planet. And it's worth defending, it's worth protecting. And healthy fresh water comes from healthy life in that water. And if we mess the life up, which that'll happen, we're not going to have the healthy water that we should have, and the kids not yet born should have. You know, get informed and contact your elected representatives at the local, state, and federal level. I would also reach out to Commissioner Chairwoman Jane Corwin, who is now the chairwoman of the International Joint Commission. She is from Western New York, from Clarence. She served in the State Assembly for a number of years, and she was recently appointed and confirmed to the IJC, which now the United States has the majority. They flip that majority every 10 years, and now we've got 10 years of a majority on a 3-2 board. And we need to have a permanent moratorium on that. If we can do that from the Great Lakes Water Quality Board, the issue is over with, and the kids not yet born will have healthy water. That's what we really need to push for.
Okay, and that's what you're doing, or do you have other plans that you
We're pushing the EPA, and you know, obviously we're also looking at, from a state level, the public trust laws. You know, the lake bottom, which is what Governor Cuomo has authority over, is held in public trust on behalf of the people by New York State. And there's some significant public trust concerns, especially when we have a sand cap out there covering decades of industrial pollution that is no longer getting into the food chain. It's no longer contaminating the fish. And now he wants to dig all that up and re-expose it into the food chain. I've got a problem with public trust. That's a violation of my trust. And we're going to pursue that in court if we have to. Well, the Army Corps of Engineers has been integrally involved in everything that has to do with the Great Lakes, including the industrial pollution. They were the ones that have to go out and dredge and dump. They were the ones for decades that polluted the lake. Anything that they have to build or has to be built is going to be done under the authority and done by the Army Corps of Engineers in these international waterways. So I'm not sure how the stanchions are going to be taken care of, whether the wind developer is going to do it or if it's going to be a joint effort between the Army Corps, but that's more money that we are spending in folly to pursue destruction of our natural resources and 21% of our fresh water for the world. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
You spoke of the ability of water to transmit the sound. How about infrasound? Have you looked into infrasound?
Infrasound is going to move just as quick, if not faster. Again, it's going to be the physical properties of air versus water. You know, the more dense something is, the better sound and vibration is going to travel. Ultrasound is going to be the same thing. And the one thing I haven't looked at yet is the electromagnetic interference that's going to happen from the transmission lines. You know, that could pose a significant danger to some of the invertebrates as well as the vertebrates. So, you know, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. They can't be answered in a short period of time. But our kids not yet born demand those answers before we act, because if we act and it's too late, we could spend decades cleaning up this mess. And we've already learned that lesson. We don't need to learn it again and again and again. You know, that's where wisdom comes into play. And I'm a very firm believer in it.
The fishing's the most phenomenal it's probably been in all my lifetime of being here. Right now you can go out here anywhere from 75 to 90 feet of water from here all the way to the PA line, and within 2 hours you can have 3 limits of walleyes. You can have 18 walleyes in the boat. Every boat just about is catching fish right now. You'll see today when these guys come in. I'm Captain Larry Jones. I'm the president of Eastern Lake Erie Charter Boat Association. I'm on the Erie County Fish Advisory Board, and I'm the fishing director for Erie County Federation of Sportsmen's Club. And I'm on the Chautauqua Fishing Alliance with the chemical treatment problems we're having on Chautauqua Lake. Well, there's a lot of problems with the wind turbines going in Lake Erie. Everything from taking away spawning grounds for walleyes to obstruction to areas where fishermen can't fish. But probably the most important thing on my mind about it is the pollution that can be caused by when you have a blowout of a bearing and the oil and that. There's no containment. It's going to go in the water. How are you going to go out there in the middle of the winter during the ice storms and everything else and the flow of ice to repair these? Are you going to do that with a helicopter, or how are you going to, it's the money. The money it costs to build one of those windmills, you'll never recuperate that money in the runtime of the windmill and the life of the windmill. I mean, the 90% of the time they're not running. You know, the 10% of the time they are running, they can't run if the wind's too strong, they can't run if the wind's too light. The wind's got to be in the right direction or it won't work right either. And then the collection of the energy that you're getting from it, where can you store it without having a major battery farm which is using more fossil fuel and more green energy is gone and wasted just building that system. Basically, fishermen are completely opposed to it because it's going to restrict where you can fish. So obviously they're going to put a half-mile or more radius around each wind turbine that you can't get near because of the possibility of a blade coming off or a catastrophe of some kind. So those areas are not going to be fished anymore, but also it's going to change the current flows. So you're going to have sand build up behind them. You're going to have complete change of the whole ecosystem of the lake. So where the fish go will be behind those turbines, building up on them sand piles behind them where you can't fish. So you're going to lose 90% of the whole area where that's at, plus all the fish that you normally catch are going to be in those zones where you can't fish. If you affect the spawning grounds, then you're not going to have good year class for behind the fish that you have, so it's going to go downhill. You know, or the fish are going to not come down to this end of the lake and they're going to stay up towards the other end, towards Pennsylvania and Ohio, and spawn all up there and not move this way like they normally migrate from one end of the lake to the other. If the conditions are not right, they're not going to stay in it. But probably the most important thing out of this is that how is Homeland Security going to determine boats are coming when those are going to show up on their radar before the boats do, and it's going to block them being able to see if there's boats bringing drugs or whatever in across, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to use those to get through the system to get to shore. That there's this Article 10 that New York State has where Governor Cuomo has the rights over the waters, over the towns, the cities, the counties, and everything else. He can pretty much just say, I want them here, and they're there.
This is a walleye or yellow pike, whatever. This is what everybody likes to eat. This is one of the best eating fish in Lake Erie.
And can I get your names and your boat here?
Ed Shinsius.
And I'm Jim Tunney. And the name of the boat is Looney Tunes Sport Fishing.
And what do you think of the idea of wind turbines in the lake?
No dice, no way. Yeah, we're on committees against them. We gotta stop them. Yeah. I live on the lake like he does, and who wants to look out and see them, you know? And then a lady put out a email last night saying that how much damage they do to ecology to make the turbines and the blades and all that. So
right, and the chemicals.
Terrible.
What's going to happen in the bottom of the lake when they put turbines, these big 30-foot concrete blocks on top of the soil? They're going to sink in. Are the turbines going to, because of the way Lake Erie is, shift and fall in the lake? They don't know that, but they're going to say they're going to take a chance. But it's our water. We don't want to have it contaminated.
Holding our newest and latest brochure, reflecting our being against the windmills in Lake Erie, because we feel there's a lot of issues involved in putting commercial windmills into our freshwater supply. We feel it's going to be detrimental to our fishery, which we have one of the best freshwater fisheries in the country here. Birds. Aesthetics way low on the list, but still people don't want to see these things. And quite frankly, I'm old enough to remember when the federal government some years ago, maybe 50 years ago, declared Lake Erie a dead lake. And a lot of people, I think, still remember that. Now what's happened over the years is we've had the sedimentation cover over a lot of these toxics that are at the bed of Lake Erie right now. So do we want to disturb that and bring these chemicals back into our water supply and create a real issue, environmental issue for us? You know, this is all about greed on Wall Street. and the governor's position on this. This is not necessary for us to disturb our freshwater basin here in Erie County, Chautauqua County, all the way down to Cleveland, Ohio, where I guess they're going to put some windmills, wind turbines. So deadly against it. I'm county legislator in Erie County. I put forth a resolution condemning putting windmills in Lake Erie. And Chautauqua County unanimously did the same thing. So we got to keep the pressure up on the state legislators and our Congressman Tom Reed, good man, and Chris Collins. They're both, I think, in support of no windmills in Lake Erie. Well, there will be a negative economic benefit because if you took the subsidies away from the windmills, the wind turbines that they get from the federal government, you'd find that it was not cost effective for these people to go ahead with this technology. On top of that, it's going to cost each resident of Chautauqua and Erie County more money on their electric bill to help subsidize this. And on top of this, the shelf life on these wind turbines are somewhere around only 7 years. So what do we do with them after the 7-year lifespan? So these are all serious issues. And on top of that, the support power unit that would, when the windmills go down or aren't running, would be a plant out of Pennsylvania, which creates electricity by coal burning fossil fuel. So does this make any sense to anybody? It doesn't. We should focus more on our grid, which is in deep repair. We would save 30% worth of energy if we focus on redoing the grid we have in New York State. Because you can't store the wind power. It has to be used immediately in the grid. Now, the people can do something to prevent this. They can go out and present documents like this to the average person who's not really knowing what this is all about, believe it or not, and write to their elected officials, their state officials, and congressional officials to please stop this from happening. It's very necessary that we gain public support for this, because right now it's the best kept secret among a lot of residents.
I got it right here.
Some residents say, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, they're just windmills. Well, there's a reason why right here. Exactly why there's something wrong with this. Plus, it's going to cost them more money. So.
What people can do is to continue to put pressure on their elected officials, on Albany, on our governor's office, and let them know that we will not stand for this. We will not stand for this blatantly bogus political agenda that doesn't do anything to really address climate change. What it does do is put money in the pockets of Wall Street investment firms that have figured out that they get guaranteed returns courtesy of the taxpayers and ratepayers if they put these monstrosities up all over the place. And we do not want them here in Lake Erie, our precious lake that is the source of drinking water for over 11 million people in 2 countries. It's something that we profit from just by being here. We don't need someone else coming in and stealing that away to put it in their own pockets and destroy our economy, destroy the ecology of our lake, and truly be a net negative.
In evaluating the environmental impact of alternative energy, it's important that policymakers and members of the public consider the entire environmental footprint that occurs in a wind farm, for example. An industrial wind farm involves between 60 and 80 truckloads of concrete, and that concrete itself has a substantial greenhouse gas impact, and it involves literally hundreds of tons of steel. And all that steel, of course, the iron ore is mined out of the earth. It's added with coke, high energy smelting. There's a huge environmental footprint in just creating a wind farm. And so it's not a panacea for the solution to our energy needs. And we need to take a much deeper and broader look at the impact of these industrial wind farms on the entire global warming by considering the entire greenhouse gas footprint that's involved in their construction as well as their operation.
Regarding Lake Erie, adjacent to Dunkirk, what do you think about that?
Well, we're blessed here in Chautauqua County with phenomenal views of Lake Erie as well as of our other lakes as well. And I think it would be very unfortunate and very short-sighted to destroy the beautiful view that we have of nature by putting up an industrial wind farm that obstructs that view and changes the entire feeling and the nature of this area.
I'm going to try to introduce some people. There's a lot of people here, but I'm going to get George Brillo up here first. He's going to say a few words.
Thank you, Zen. First of all, I would like to say welcome to Chautauqua County, to all of you here that are visiting from elsewhere. It's like this every day here, so come on out. Winter, summer, doesn't matter. It's always beautiful. And I want to say thank you very much once again to the Eastern Lake Erie Charter Boat captains, the folks here at the Con Club, for once again putting on a wonderful VIP day. Thank you all very much for what you've done for us. So as much as this is a lot of fun and we're enjoying ourselves and having a great meal, this is about bringing attention to the importance of Lake Erie, of our fisheries, of the recreation, of the economic impact here. And once again, we're all getting together and talking about those things. And every time we get together, every year, there's a new issue to discuss. And I think we all know what the latest issue on the front burner is for us. And I'll let Bill Hiltz talk about that a little bit later. But the bottom line is this. If we don't respect this lake, if we don't respect the impact that it has on our lives, our daily lives, we will lose it. You know, I'm old enough to remember when Lake Erie was declared a dead lake. Does everyone remember that? Remember when the river was on fire in Ohio? Remember what this lake looked like at one time? On the cover of Time magazine, Lake Erie is dead. We recovered from that, but it took a long time. And now we're being threatened that might happen again. And I hope to God that doesn't, and I want to be thankful to guys like John Mills, who's here, for all that he's done to protect this lake over many years. John, thanks for all your hard work. So thank you all for being here. Hope you enjoy the program. And again, thank you very much for all of you that work so hard, volunteer your time in the best interest of our community. Thank you all.
Thank you, George. George is good for us, so I'm going to hand it over to Andy Goodell, please.
Once again, another great, successful VIP fishing tour. That means I arrived here, went out on a boat, came back on the same boat with dry feet. Lance, many thanks. Zen, many thanks. I always get a kick when I'm with professionals who try to convince me that I'm fishing, and I know all I'm doing is reeling in. But what a great experience. And of course, as you know, a lot of fish were brought in today. And that's an amazing experience for people who haven't been fishing to go out on a beautiful day like today on Lake Erie and bring in one fish after another. It is truly a great treasure here in Western New York, on our shores, an untapped resource for many people, and part of our challenge is to get people out there. Special thanks, by the way, to all the captains who brought us out. Thank you very much. A special thank you for letting us think that we were actually fishing. That's a great skill, and thank you for that as well. Hope everyone had as much fun and as I did. I will share with you that I was on the same boat with Steve Hurst from the DEC, and you'd be surprised to say that he was lobbying for the fisheries. Can you believe that on a day like today? More funding.
Are you trying to get me fired?
That'll get you a promotion. Certainly with this group. So thanks for everything all you do.
John Mills is here from Erie County Legislator. Do you want to say a few words?
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for inviting us here this afternoon. You know, I've been here several times, and today I was out on the boat, and we got 6 walleye. One was 7.35 pounds, and we had a great time. And I want to thank everyone here for what you guys, girls, do. I also want to introduce a new legislator I brought with me from Erie County, Tim Myers. Tim, stand up. And Tim is, I'll put him on the spot. Tim is our chairman of Energy and Environment Committee, so he's the fellow who's going to with me take any heat from the Sierra Club on September the 19th. So, but Tim and I are prepared. But Tim loves fishing. He got a huge fish, so it's been great. So I want to thank you again for all you guys do and girls do, because we got the best fishery, probably freshwater fishery, probably in the world right here. Not just this country, but the world. I saw that with the bass tournament we had when I thought it was at a NASCAR race. 300 boats with all those commercials on the advertising on the boats over at ECC South Community College in Erie County. And I said, my God, this is unbelievable. 300 boats. Fortunately, I think they got blown off the lake the first or second day, but they were telling me the walleye they fished for before they went in the tournament were jumping in the boat. So they love that. So thanks again for all you do, and thanks for inviting us back again.
It's a good thing that he wasn't bragging about the fish that was caught on the boat that he was on. But I guess I'm going to have to introduce some girl from Tom Reed's office that caught that fish. So, did you take all the bands off your wrist and your ankles and your neck and everything else because you're afraid of getting seasick?
Well, I can't tell you I don't have an ankle bracelet because they might be monitoring me right now, so you never know where I'm going to end up. I didn't get seasick this year. I'm going to thank my captain. It was his first year, Captain Larry. I just want to recognize him. Hopefully he'll come back after having me on his boat. But he did a great job. So I just want to thank him and all the captains today. And I'm sorry Tom is not here. Unfortunately, he already had another thing planned when this came up. But I can tell you that within the next week, I think we're going to have him out on a boat in Lake Erie. So he'll be getting his own experience, and we appreciate the charter captains have always been willing to accommodate us and work with us. And he had a recent meeting here with some of you talking about Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and how we'll continue to be a vocal advocate for funding to keep our lakes and waterways clean and safe. We recognize all you do to promote this region, and a day like today, we don't necessarily get this in other parts of our district. So we're so appreciative that we have this opportunity to promote the region, and that we have media here today, you know, the observers here, and obviously some folks with cameras, but it's important for us to advocate for that to the public so they understand why there's a need for federal dollars, for state dollars, for local dollars to go to this economic driver. So on behalf of Tom, thank you. He looks forward to seeing a couple of you next week. And the opportunity to get out on the water, because that's where he loves to be. Thank you.
Thank you. I think she got the big fish for that thing. Andrew, you want to say a few words?
Sure. Good. Andrew Nixon, Chautauqua Visitors Bureau. I would just like to recognize that we use this event to invite some outdoor travel media from around the United States. And if you're a member of the outdoor travel media, could you just stand? You too, Bill. Yeah. And there's a few more. They must be cleaning fish right now. We have 6 visiting the area for a few days, and this is a highlight of their trip. And we also have, well, let me recognize Dave Barris. Just raise your hand. Dave coordinates all that for us 3 times a year, and so we promote the area that way. And sitting next to Dave is Bill Hiltz. He's the world's greatest outdoor travel writer from Niagara Falls and Buffalo. Sitting next to his teacher, Dave. Thank you.
Okay. Mark Geis is here. You want anything to say, or?
Well, just real quick, I mean, we recognize Mark Geis. I'm the CEO of the Industrial Development Agency here, and we're a sponsor of this event. And the reason being is we understand what an important economic driver this is, and this is my 2nd year doing this, and I had a blast. I'm a fisherman anyway, so I recognize that, but we have so many natural assets here, and we need to do whatever we can to promote those assets. And it's good for the environment, it's good for our economy, it's good for the people. So thank you for everything you do, and I hope to see you next year.
I want to name a few more people. Steve Hurst, you got a couple words? I know you were nervous out on a boat, but I like to see you jump around. Steve Hurst is from the DEC, New York State. Introduce yourself.
Hi, Steve Hurst, Chief of Fisheries, DEC. So there's a reason why I was nervous out on the boat. Coming here, it's not just fun to go fishing, all right? But there's an added value. When you go out with Lance and Zen, you get the Lance and Zen show. Sometimes that can make you a little nervous. All right? I love these two characters. It's an honor to be here. Real quick, I think a lot of what's been said, what Andy said, Mark, George, I can echo all of that. But the one thing I want to say is, biologist wants to say to you, you know what? We've got 3 great year classes of walleye out there right now. That's the primary reason for this fruitful fishery, but I'm not going to say that. The primary reason is because of the dedicated staff that manage this fishery at DEC. One of them who is going to give you a presentation today. They work really hard on this. But the second part of that equation is the anglers themselves. The anglers are a vital component of this fishery. They provide us feedback. We listen to them, and we listen to them more and more as we're going on in our path here to manage these waters and all waters across the state. That's vitally important, and events like this help it immensely. And the other thing it helps, as other people have mentioned, all right, is that I'm a firm believer in people that understand the resource, then have respect for the resource, and then will advocate for the resource. Events like this do exactly that. The more advocacy we have, the better we can manage the waters, and it makes everybody happy. And I'll leave it at that. And Zen, thank you for having me out again this year.
Thank you, Steve. Steve is a great advocate for Lake Erie and New York State waters. A couple other people I'd just like to recognize really quick. Jeff Jondal is here from Erie County Federation of Sportsmen Clubs. Joe Fisher is from the Fish Advisory Board. Chuck Godfrey is the past president of the Erie County Federation of Sportsmen Clubs. And I know I'm going to miss a lot more people, but there's a lot of important people here, like the captains, etc., that donated their time and effort and their first mates. So, Sue Gunther's from Southtown Walleye, okay? Why don't we get started on our presentations? Is that all right? Okay. John DiAgostino from the Observer's here. Gene Poshak's from the Observer here. They're valuable people to the city of Dunkirk and our area. And Nancy Nichols from Jim Nichols Hometown Services here too. Thank you. Jason, you want to go up? Sure. I'd like to introduce Larry Jones from the Eastern Lake Erie Charter Boat Association. Also.
Yeah, welcome to today's 10th edition. I believe it's 11th? Wow, I'm falling behind a year. But anyway, I'm happy to see such a great turnout today. And I think Jason's going to give us a little bit of how the walleyes work on movement on Lake Erie.
So I'm Jason Robinson. Before I start, I think I should acknowledge my predecessor, Don Einhaus, who's a previous Lake Erie unit leader. I think he worked in and around Lake Erie for like 37 years. He's not here today, but he's really one of the main reasons why we have the resource that we do today. So big thanks to Don. And none of this work what I'm going to be talking about would be possible without Don. So have to acknowledge Don. So it's a pretty exciting time to be a walleye angler on Lake Erie, and it might even be a more exciting time to be a walleye biologist on Lake Erie. The new technologies and techniques that have come online over the past 5 years have allowed us to just learn things about this walleye resource that we really never thought we would. And the end goal is to make us better managers of your resource. Before I get into the exciting details of what we've learned, it's important to just go over how we manage walleye in Lake Erie. Very simple. Everything to the west of the dashed line is managed as if it's a commercial fishery. stock assessment, just like you'd see in like North Atlantic cod, tuna. There's quota setting. Everything in the purple, which is where we are, does not get that same kind of treatment. Still managed well, but it's not managed in that style of a serious commercial fishery. One of the reasons for that is that we didn't have a great understanding of how walleye moved in between these two areas. And that's what we're going to try to illustrate now. So a little while back, we got this new technology that we could use to understand fish movements. It's called acoustic telemetry, and it works almost like an easy pass. There's a tag in the fish that's putting out a signal, and so every 2 minutes it's putting out a signal saying this is where I am and this is the fish that I am. And then there's a receiver, which is the orange and black thing that's on the bottom of the lake, and it's detecting that signal. So if the fish swims by the receiver knows that it was there. And then at the end of the year, we pop the receiver up to the surface and get it and download the data. So the question is, how close does it have to be? It depends on a lot of things, but it's about a mile. Yeah, it's quite far. And we have receivers all over the Great Lakes and into Lake Champlain. And you can see that Lake Erie is really the epicenter of this research. So each one of these yellow dots represents one of those receivers. So if a tagged walleye moves in Lake Erie, we know about it pretty much. And we have hundreds of fish tagged between us, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and the province of Ontario. Okay, so anybody who's a serious walleye angler on Lake Erie has known for 30 years that the migration of Western Basin walleye, so fish that are born in the Western Basin, to our Eastern Basin waters and to our New York waters, are vital to our fishery. So we wanted to really understand how those fish moved across the lake and how they moved into New York waters. Okay, so each blue dot is a fish, and we're gonna watch them. Right now it's April, they're in the Western Basin, they're spawning. We're about to watch them just explode out into the lake and be vulnerable to all the different fisheries in the lake. I'll read off the months so you don't have to worry about that. And here they go. They're gonna get done spawning. Oh, and that didn't work. Hopefully I can get it to work here. It's April, May, and they are just moving. June, July, August, September, October, November. So they're even in New York in November, and now they're starting to head home, make their way back to the Western Basin to spawn. So it'd be really difficult to argue that these fish don't represent a resource that's shared by everyone across the lake, and that's how they need to be managed, and that's how we hope to manage them at the culmination of this research. And they occupy New York waters for really most of the year and certainly all of the fishing season. So that's important to know, and they do go back to the Western Basin to spawn. So now let's look at the movement of our local fish. And when I say local, I mean fish that spawn in places like Van Buren, Lackawanna Shore, these areas. So again, these fish are spawning near these red circles, and we're going to watch how they move across the lake when they get done spawning. So we're starting in April again. Now we're in June. We do see some fish moving into the Central Basin, but most of our, quote-unquote, our fish stay in the eastern portion of the lake. So they're vulnerable to fisheries in Pennsylvania, the province of Ontario, and New York. So these represent a shared resource locally, but they're really not a resource that's vulnerable to the massive commercial fisheries in the Central Basin and then the massive recreational fishery in Ohio. So we think of these as our local fish. So let's try to translate that into real numbers. About 5% at any given time during the fishing season of these Western Basin fish are in our waters in the east. So 5% doesn't seem like a very big number, but what that translates to is over 2 million walleye being injected into our fishery, and hopefully a lot of you guys caught some of those today. Okay, another technology that's on the scene now and is every year getting better and better is genetic analysis.
One of the questions people ask me is, when I catch a fish out there, is it one of our fish or is it a fish that has migrated from the Western Basin? It's really difficult to tell, but we're just started a project that is hopefully going to give us the answer to that. We collected about 2,000 samples in our fishery, so we went out and collected them directly from you anglers, and then we collected 2,000 samples from commercial fishermen in the province of Ontario in the eastern portion of Lake Erie. And we're working with some geneticists who are going to be able to tell us where each fish came from. So is it a fish that is ours, spawned locally, or is it a fish from the Western Basin? And that is going to help us understand how we share resources and how we can best manage the fishery.
Jason, who's that guy in the corner over there?
Oh, that's Don Einhaus. Yeah.
Still making brownie points, huh?
Okay. Probably many of you who are anglers in the audience have wondered about walleye spawning behavior. So do they go back to the same place to spawn every year, or do they spawn in different places every year, or do they not spawn every year? And this acoustic telemetry data has allowed us to answer some of those questions that we've had for a really long time.
So each one of these represents a spawning shoal. So this is Van Buren Bay, very close to where we are now. And what we're going to look at is how many fish from the spawning shoal came back. So we have 111 fish on Van Buren. 92 of them came back to spawn the next year. So most of them. Now 10 of them skipped. They didn't come back, but they came back in a subsequent year. So they skipped spawning altogether. Didn't spawn every year. And then a portion of them strayed away and spawned somewhere else, which is very interesting because historically we've thought of all these different spawning shoals as really discrete spawning areas. But that thinking is starting to change, and we're starting to think of this as maybe a whole complex of spawning shoals that is passing walleye in between them. Now, also interestingly, so you see Smokes Creek, the spawning shoal right up by Buffalo, it had virtually no exchange. Those fish really keep to themselves and go back to the same spot to spawn, and they don't stray to other spawning shoals. So we're learning more than we ever thought we could about walleye behavior as a result of this project. Okay, these last two slides are just fall into the category of this is really cool. So I'm going to show you the behaviors of a couple of individual walleye that we've been tracking for a long time. So this first one is a male, about 25 inches long. And so let's just start and I'll narrate. So he's spawning in the Western Basin. He goes all the way to Buffalo. And a year goes by. And he hangs out in the East Basin. He goes back to spawn, the West Basin again. Goes all the way to Buffalo again, very rapidly. So that's 200 miles in 20 days he went. And he just keeps doing the same thing year after year. Very repeatable behavior. So this isn't being driven by bait or temperature. This guy just does the same thing year after year. And you might think that I cherry-picked this out of the data, and it's just not the case. This seems to be the rule. So now let's look at a female, 28 inches. I'll do this again. So she spawns on the same reef, and she just keeps going back year after year. This is 5 years. She never goes more than 40 miles from her home base. Something totally different than that male did. So these fish seem to be more habitual than we may have thought. They just are doing the same things every year. So the most important thing is how can we use all this information to better manage the walleye fishery? As Steve said, it's a really well-managed fishery. It's not an exaggeration to say that Lake Erie is the best managed freshwater fishery in the world. And that's really not an exaggeration, it's true.
But we're always trying to get better. And what this work does, fundamentally, it adds to our understanding of walleye ecology in Lake Erie, which is very important. We understand how we share resources between Ohio and New York, Pennsylvania. That's also very important. And so it impacts the decision making. decisions that they make in the western portion of Lake Erie impact us here in the east in a big way. And so it's important that we have a seat at that table, and we do, and we will continue to have a seat at that table. And finally, we're very hopeful that this work will finally allow us to incorporate New York wildlife fishery in more fully into the lake-wide management cycle. And I would be remiss if I let you think that I did all this myself. We're just small players in a greater cooperative effort. So thank you very much, guys.
What a great bunch of information, huh? Yeah. That was fabulous.
Sir.
Yes. In the Canadian shores, around Dunnville, there's a large population of female walleye. Are they migrating west and east, or do they live there, do you know?
I actually had another slide. I don't know the answer to your specific question, but I can tell you that the Grand River spawning population is on the Canadian shore. And you looked at the West Basin fish and our local fish, and they moved all over. That population up there is so anomalous, it just stays there and doesn't move. And so they actually have a behavior that's unlike all the other populations in the lake at that particular spawning area. So.
It's part of Homeland Security. They don't have a good passport.
I also think there's a Buffalo River group of walleyes that don't move too far either. They kind of stay by the mouth and go up and back down to the mouth and back up, because I run the Buffalo Pedal Tour boat up there. I'm marking large schools of walleyes all summer long, all up through the river system. Anyway, our next speaker, Rich Davenport. He's always got something good for us to hear.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wow, it's a lot of people here today, and I'd like to thank everybody here, and the both fisheries advisory boards. We started doing this collaboratively a number of years ago. I think this is our 11th one now, and focusing on working together in a partnership to promote the Great Lakes. Lake Erie is the #1 sport fishing lake of all 5 Great Lakes. There's more angling hours spent. There's more dollars spent. There's a lot more fish that are in there. It's a much more fertile lake because of its shallow nature. It is a unique resource that we all have a special responsibility to make sure that we're communicating with the state officials when we see problems so we can react quicker to it. We're monitoring things such as toxic spills and the quality of the fishery itself, because one thing that is symbiotic about all watery habitat, especially when you're talking about freshwater fisheries, is that healthy life in a freshwater fishery equals healthy freshwater. There is nothing more important on planet Earth than fresh water to all of us. And having a lake that is part of 21% of the world's surface freshwater resource really tells us not only how fortunate we are, but what type of a responsibility we all have, be it recreational anglers or business concerns or state agencies and people that are managing and protecting this resource on our behalf.
There is nothing more important. After all, if we don't have healthy fresh water, we don't have healthy people. We drink it every day. We water our crops. We bathe in it. We make beverages, the Pepsi and so on and so forth, the beer that we get, that's all coming from Lake Erie. And it's not just in our area that this impact of the healthy water or not so healthy water, it's not just in our area, because we have products that are shipped by truck and by train all over the country and maybe even all over the world. So what we do and what we decide with this lake will set a tone for either very good quality life for the kids not yet born, or maybe not so much. And we've learned that painful lesson, I think we have. Starting back in the early 1900s, we looked at the lake as pollution control. The solution to pollution is dilution. And as we had this wonderful evolution of the Industrial Revolution, we needed to make room
based on industrial waste. We didn't have the knowledge that we have today, but we had to do something. And hey, we've got this lake out here. It's right there. We don't have to ship it with horse and buggy. We can drag it out into the lake, dump it in there. The lake is so big with 9 quadrillion gallons aggregately in the Great Lakes Basin. 9 quadrillion, that's a lot of water, right? So it'll never ever possibly have a problem. And as we heard back in 1971, this lake was declared dead by the Cousteau Society because of the industrial pollution, our cavalier treatment of the waters of life. Now, you can sum up conservation, and I believe a lot of us are conservationists. I like to think I'm a conservationist, and it's a simple thing. The wise use of our natural resources as to perpetuate them forever. Certainly things that we're going to do are going to have trade-offs. If we need to move in progress in terms of building a new subdivision, well, we have to take a look at how those other impacts all around it are going to change the dynamics of, say, water tables or increase pressure on wastewater systems, etc. We do an evaluation and we apply what's known as wisdom. If the cost does not outweigh the benefit, it's going to give tremendous benefit to the people at a very low cost, well, that's kind of wise and you can go ahead and move forward. When the cost is the other way around and it's going to cost you too much and the risk is too great, especially to our waters of life, nothing more important, that's no longer wisdom. That's what I call folly. So today we have folly that is coming down in the name of trying to be wise to save the planet. And that is industrial wind turbines to be placed out in the open waters of our waters of life. Let's see if it's wise. Healthy life in the lake equals healthy water. Well, what happens when you put physical displacement in water? You're going to change dynamics of the currents. You're going to change the flow of phytoplankton, zooplankton, temperature, oxygen mixation. That's just going to happen. We already know this. We've learned this from physics for many, many hundreds of years. We can take that from a stream or a river or even a lake, such as Lake Chautauqua. When that bridge went in at the end of Bemis Point, it changed the current flow because it restricted it. It picked up speed. It changed the dynamics of the fisheries there. When we put the Black Rock Canal in, it certainly changed a heck of a lot of the dynamics in the upper river. When we put those windmills out there, it's going to change the current in that area. It's going to change it. It's going to be a risk to the fish. Is it going to be big? Is it going to be noticeable right away? That one probably not, but there is going to be a change. Is the change worth what we're going to get? Well, let's think about wind turbines for a second and energy. When we hear we're going to put a wind farm up, what do we get told by the developer? It's capacity, right? We're going to have 200 megawatts of capacity that could power up to 3 million homes. Okay, well, people, I want to tell you right now that if you look at your electric bill, did you pay for kilowatts or kilowatt hours? And since we pay for energy over time, it's kilowatt hours. Why are we being told a capacity of megawatts, which is a one-time shot? It's because the variability of the wind itself, nobody's fault, it's nature, does not allow for steady, consistent, reliable, predictable energy over time. So they can't tell you they're going to generate 200 megawatt hours because 1 minute the wind may be blowing at the sweet spot. The next minute the wind can die. You don't have smooth, consistent energy. And electrical energy has to be smooth and consistent over time for anything to function. You lose power for any moment during that hour, that light goes off. Or perhaps that hospital room ER gets heated up and you have higher bacterial counts on account of it. Or maybe your oil refinery can't trigger its safety instrumentation system when something goes bad, the power goes out, you might have something go boom. I've been in that business for 14 years. I've lived it, I've breathed it. You have to have energy over time. Besides that, why would you tell me about capacity? Because the last time I knew, those lights consume output. There is zero relationship between capacity, which is potential, and output, which is what's delivered. I think an analogy would be the Buffalo Bills. We've heard for the last 20 years about their potential, right? How many Super Bowls has that potential put on the Rich Stadium wall? 0. And that is exactly how much energy we are going to get off of your average wind farm. In fact, the standards based on the New York Independent Systems Operators' own standards to deliver a safe, reliable, and electrical grid on an industrial level demands every single power source that's going to get what's called as an interconnect, meaning, you know, plug it in so you can get it from the power station to the house so the light bulb actually can use it. 60% of nameplate capacity, 24/7, 365. This is for safety and reliability standards. They have to meet base demand. Base demand is over base load. What is that? Well, base load is the electrical energy that charges the wires. You cannot deliver electricity to a house without an electrified wire. It's just going to get eaten up by what's known as Ohm's law. So base demand is what everybody's going to use. And if your demand breaks over that base load period, what do you have? Does anybody know? Brownout. Yes, not a blackout. A blackout is complete loss of it. That was like what happened back in 2003, where you had a repeater card failed somewhere up in the northern tier, and the redundancy failover failed, and it failed again, and then we had 3 days of a blackout right across up and down the eastern seaboard. That's the resiliency thing. That's why microgrids started becoming a thing, to try to be more resilient to that. But neither here nor there. A brownout is when you exceed your electrical energy supply with demand, and it de-energizes the lines, and you can't get energy there. You can't deliver it. That's why you have to be able to dial up when it's needed to meet the peak demand. Otherwise, everybody's in a constant state of rolling brownouts. Well, does anybody think that the wind is going to blow 24/7, 365 at the right speed? Because bear in mind, wind turbines, these industrial turbines, have a sweet spot. If there is no wind, you're not getting any power. But if it's too much, it can't handle it. It'll burn out the gearbox. They have to shut it down. The sweet spot's between 5 and 25. Too high, shut down. Too low, no spin. No power, no nothing. Thank you very much. That's not 24/7, 365. In order to try to make these renewables fit into what's known as this Renewable Portfolio Standard, or RPS, it's a make-believe number to get away from other traditional sources. You've got 30% now that they're going to demand. 30%, which is going to work to further destabilize the grid. You're saying, okay, I'm going to plug you in. You can only have to do half as good as this one. But you still can't deliver it 24/7, 365. So we go 30%. We jeopardize our grid. We destabilize it. We're already seeing problems in New York City. They're blaming it on something else. It's actually brownouts. They don't have the power anymore. They're trying to bring it in from other areas. Antiquated infrastructure. We've all heard that in a number of areas. But is it wise to now take these things that can't be interconnected into the grid without a backup system, and they're talking about maybe using a coal plant? You can't use coal to back that up. You need fast response. You can't spin up and spin down coal without a lot of power, without a lot of pollution that happens. You know, anthracite burns clean when it's at temperature. When you're spinning it up and taking it down, that's when it's dirty. So why would you spin up or down a coal plant to act as a backup? That would be natural gas, is what you would use. Open cycle fast response gas turbines that are made by GE, specifically to cater to the wind industry. But they're going to use the coal plant over here, while it's still running, which gets it off the RPS. So it makes New York look a lot greener than it does. Meanwhile, that's still not interconnected, so you can't get your electrons there. You also have Ohm's law. You've got transmission lines, and you're going to have to trench the sand cap that is out in that lake right now because it's shallow. All that industrial pollution hasn't disappeared. It's just cut off from the food chain from the natural siltation that happens from runoff. It happens to be shallow enough to allow that silt to cross entirety across that lake. Because as you know, with marine physics, the deeper the water, the more volume, the slower the current, then the particulates start settling out and so on. By the time it gets over 260 feet deep, there's no sediment in it. That's why the other Great Lakes will forever be industrially poisoned. But this one is unique. Is it worth to get nothing, to not get the interconnect, to even trench those lines to begin with? I don't think so. You're going to re-expose our natural water, our waters of life, and the life that keeps it healthy for nothing. That's folly. Folks, it's total folly. Now let's talk about that life specifically. There was an article a few weeks ago that I noticed about the offshore wind farm in the Atlantic Ocean. And there's a big commercial fishery, if people don't know that, in the oceans. And the commercial fishermen said, you know, this is going to cause us a problem. We can't access the fishing grounds. Oh, don't worry, we're not going to have any safety zones or buffer zones. Well, the fish, every single vertebrate in a marine environment that I'm aware of, hunts and survives by sound and vibration. The lateral line allows them to detect prey, detect predators, help navigate, and now you're going to introduce acoustic vibration that will continually thrum. Now, we already have found out what it does on land, and people who are living near these industrial wind turbines are suffering sleep deprivation, increased stress on account, and significant health problems. The answer has been increasing the setback, but those that were there before this was even looked at or it was ignored. Now these people are suffering. And remember our physics lessons. Sound travels stronger, faster, and farther in water than it will on land. So now what are you going to do to that life? You're going to displace those fish anywhere you put these. And oh, by the way, this lake is not as big as the ocean. And if we start getting to the goal of those 1,500 turbines that these people are really looking at, not just the 50 that they want to start with, 1,500 of them, that's going to echo and reverberate across the entire lake. Every single fish species, every single bait fish, any vertebrate is going to be impacted on that, and that isn't going to be positive. You can take that to the bank. We already know this. We've studied this stuff for decades and decades and decades, and it's now being borne out in the Atlantic Ocean where the fishermen are going over near those turbines, and there's not a fish to be found. They've been driven away by that noise. At least they can go halfway around the world and get away from it, but they can't go to Ohio and get away from it if Ohio sticks them in there. They can't go up to Canada if Canada sticks them in there, and that's going to impact the health of the water. People, this is our waters of life. Why would we risk it for folly? How about money? Let's talk about money, because we've got this, the governor came out and said, hey, $3.8 billion of economic activity. I don't know what that means, but let's talk about the money. One of the things that government officials need to do is act with wisdom, with subsidies and grants and so on. Is it wise to take just a terrestrial or land-based turbine wind factory and fund it to the tune where the New York State Zoning and Practice Law Organization put out a report in March of 2010, I still have it today, and they found 9 years ago, yeah, I can do my math, I don't have a spreadsheet. 9 years ago, a terrestrial wind factory carried a tax rating of negative 163%. Negative 163%. Think of that. Corporate welfare, right? For every dollar they generate, the taxpayer's handing over $1.63. Who wouldn't love that deal? And a marinized wind factory is going to be conservatively estimated at 5 times that cost. So let's throw them $6 or $7 for every dollar they might generate. Does that sound wise? So we're going to fund a company to the tune of $5, $6, $7 for every dollar they make to destroy the lake and the health. That's not wise at all. No, it's not a really good idea, is it, when you think about it? And we have a bigger responsibility to the kids not yet born. You don't save the planet by destroying fresh water. I'm all for saving the planet. I'm all for responsibility. I think everybody in this room is. But there's one thing that we can't survive without, and it's right here on our shores, and it's in jeopardy right now and under attack for nothing but folly. We're not going to see energy. We're not going to see a benefit in carbon footprint. It can't even get interconnected to provide the power to the 3 million homes that they're supposedly going to power. And Is it wise, if we're going to go ahead and reduce our carbon footprint and all these emissions because of electrical energy, by targeting only 3% of our total electrical usage? Because that's what residential represents. 3% of the total. And they're going to target you and say, hey, your home is going to save the planet if we move it to here. Meanwhile, 97% of the electrical energy is coming from the industrial grid, something that they can't be interconnected to because they can't even meet the minimum standards. It's a good idea. Now, the goal in New York State by 2035, from what I saw, is something like 9,500 megawatts of installed capacity of wind energy. What the heck is installed capacity? That doesn't do a darn thing. And if you go to the New York Independent Systems Operator website right now, you will see a real-time energy dashboard, NYISO.com. These are the guys that operate the grid in New York State. And at any given time, the current 1,900 and change installed megawatt capacity of wind energy is delivering roughly 4 to 6% of its total. And that's from microgrids. There are better ways to do things. And one of those ways is not jeopardizing our fresh water. We have to protect it, people. How do we do that? Well, New York State owns, bad term, New York State holds in trust on behalf of the people the lake bottom of Lake Erie. So anything in the boundaries of New York State, when it comes to the physical bottom, the bedrock of that lake, it's held in trust on behalf of the people by New York State. They can make the decisions on that. We don't have a say in what they do on the bottom. If they want to go ahead and put things on the bottom, Canada doesn't have a say in it, Pennsylvania doesn't have a say in it, Ohio doesn't have a say in it, New York State has a say in it. But that is not true for the water. And that's what we have to protect. The water is the realm of the International Joint Commission. The Water Quality Board, the Great Lakes Water Quality Board, sets the standards. That's who we need to get with. Yes, the EPA can help too. Did everybody here know that a couple years ago, Canada issued a 10-year moratorium on installing any kind of industrial wind turbines in the Great Lakes, specifically Lake Erie? 10-year moratorium. Canada recognized it. Is Canada smarter than us? Maybe they're just wiser. Maybe they're just wiser. Because that's what we need here. We need to demand wisdom from all the elected officials, from all the people that benefit from this, because that's what the kids not yet born deserve. Not some folly for today, but wisdom for the foreseeable future. You know, if we just spent money on, I don't know, how about we modernize the electrical grid? Did you also know that if we just replace the aging copper and implement the new heat recovery technologies along the way, we could increase the output of the grid by 30% without adding a single new power generation source? 30% is better than the 6% that we get off wind coming in from microgrids when they can use it. But we're not looking at that because it's not visible. It would be even smarter to take this $3.8 billion of economic activity. Again, I don't know what that would be, but $3.8 billion would cover upgrading the wastewater systems from Buffalo down to Pennsylvania. And for every $500 million invested in that, 20,000 jobs are created. We're being promised jobs that will never materialize. Why won't they materialize? Because it takes a special skill set, expertise, for wind farms, especially marinized ones. I remember when the Dansville wind farm was being built, and the United Steelworkers in Buffalo staged a major protest on the Buffalo River, trying to stop the turbines and the stanchions from being shipped to Dansville, saying that they lied to us. They said they were going to have jobs. It's jobs for anybody but New Yorkers, because New York does not have the expertise. They had people coming in from Texas and the Dakotas. Great for them. They take their money, right back, they're gone. No benefit coming back to the people here for all our expenditures. Add that into marinized, we're going to see people from Denmark. Should we be employing people from Denmark or from people from New York? Now, we could certainly employ a heck of a lot of people from New York upgrading the wastewater systems and deliver to the kids not yet born a much healthier life. Or we can engage in folly and jeopardize all of that. So I want to call on everybody today to reach out to every single leader that you have, county, city, state, federal. Get right up there, get in their face. This is not something that we should risk. Again, when this lake was dead, there was a study when it was dying, and this is a good example of how something as ubiquitous as an insect can cause a problem. Back in 1930s, early 30s, there was a rash of respiratory ailments that nobody knew about. It was a mystery. People were choking, people were dying. And an allergist in Buffalo, New York in 1932 did a study and discovered that the female caddisfly, we call those sandflies, by the way, the female caddisfly emits a pheromone that is a histamine in people. People were having allergic reactions. That was the illness. In 1936, that study spread to the entire Great Lakes Basin. This was right around the time of the peak of the real good start of that industrial dumping. And what happened was fish were displaced from those areas that the sandflies would be hatching from, where they were being born. So you didn't have those emerging nymphs being eaten. The end result were massive plagues of sandflies. And if anybody was around in the early 70s up on this shoreline, they can attest to you that when you got to the 4th of July, if you were especially down in Buffalo, you're driving down the 190 along the river, you had to stop and scrape your radiator off from the number of flies that you had. Since that time, it's gotten a heck of a lot better. Well, because we got fish there eating them now. That's what happens. You drive the fish out, something else goes unchecked, out of balance, and that directly impacted the health of everybody in the Great Lakes Basin. We don't know where the insects hatch around here, but I can tell you a few weeks ago I was out at the Canadian line, and we ran into a hatch, and there was kabillions of them coming out. And there's fish feeding on them, keeping them in check, just like the sandflies are there today, but they're in balance. So let's just displace all those fish. Let's have a biblical plague of insects. Who knows? Maybe we'll have some biters that can spread some disease to our kids. That would be a good reward for this folly. Now, I think I'd rather use wisdom. And wisdom tells us that we just got to say no and fight to have a permanent moratorium on industrializing our waters of life so the kids not yet born aren't suffering with high rates of multiple sclerosis, aren't suffering from high rates of cancer, aren't suffering from the things that we inflicted upon our people for decades and decades and decades without knowing any better. Wisdom is also learning from those mistakes. And it seems like the people that want this still haven't learned. Thank you very, very much.